Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third edition of Real Talk. Really appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for the great feedback. We've received responses from literally all over our Air Force, and we really appreciate it. Today, we have a little bit different scenario. We're going to have two guests. We have with us today Chief Master Sergeant Natasha Williams from the 59th Medical Wing, and she hails from Easton, Maryland. And we also have with us as well Senior Master Sergeant Sapphire Morgan. She's the first sergeant at Air Force Personnel Center and from Portland, Oregon. So welcome, really thrilled that you all are with us here today. Like I said, the theme today is still the continuation of tough conversations. But obviously, unlike the other two that we've done, we have a female perspective, both a female perspective and a female African-American perspective. So we want to kind of explore that as well. The ground rules really remain kind of the same as we've had in our others. This isn't safe space. It's close. I think the goal of this is to absolutely have tough conversations. But at the end of the day, we're on social media. There may be ground that we choose that we just can't go. But it should be a really close approximation. I think one of my major themes from hosting these Real Talks is that dialogue is important. Conversations and tough conversations are important. This is not training at the end of the day. This is about us talking about national security, about readiness, about teamwork, unity, and really at the end of the day, humanity. I mean, that is what this is. And at the end of the day, that's commander's business. It's chief's business and it's first sergeant's business as well. Before we launch into the questions, I wanted to just hit a couple of things that have changed or that may have, that I can just update you on that have occurred in the diversity and inclusion portfolio since we last talked. As I mentioned last time, the Department of Defense has established a DNI, or Diversity and Inclusion Board. Our own Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Barrett, heads that up. And she, just this week, has met with Undersecretary Donovan and the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman, Chief Colin Lopez, this week. They've directed a comprehensive review by all unit commanders on emblems, nicknames, mottos, and coins. There's guidance that's mandating private rooms for nursing mothers. These rooms need to be lockable, sanitary, have access to refrigeration and electrical outlets. And then there's the hair policy. As we know, there is some discussion and proposal being floated around our Air Force today that talk about a bulk and length of hair, single and dual braided. We might kind of touch a little bit on that today. And then lastly, and maybe one that I can tell you personally that I'm really looking forward to, is, as you know, the Air Force IG has been conducting a survey that's been ongoing for the last few months. We're really on short final for receiving that report. While we've talked about some of the changes that are being implemented and could say are relatively surface level, these promise to be substantive. So really looking forward to getting that kind of report on the streets. And probably by the next time we'll be able to do this, we'll be able to talk about some of these. Okay, so Chief, how about if I let you kind of open and can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and maybe what got you headed towards an Air Force career?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town on the East Coast. It was a farm town. I grew up as an only child. I was raised by my grandparents. My grandparents were very traditional. They were a Christian family. They were no nonsense as far as, disrespect, respect for authority. They didn't tolerate a lot of disrespect. So it was a strict upbringing. And I appreciate everything they did for me because they didn't have to do it. I'm a grandchild. My mother was the baby of 9 kids and, they took me on, so I appreciate that. I joined the Air Force because I come from an Air Force family. My father was in the Army. My grandfather was in the Army. My aunt was in the Air Force. I have cousins in the Navy. So that's why I chose to take that profession. And I enjoy doing what I do.
And so did you have an inclination in high school that you would probably military was going to be it right away.
I did. When I was in the 11th grade, I took the ASVAB.
Okay.
So I was able to go into the delayed enlistment program. I graduated in 1994, but I was in the program in 1994. So I knew this was the career path for me.
Yeah.
Never thought it would be a chief, but this was a career path for me.
Sure. What were the kind of demographics there in Easton, Maryland? I mean, was it a pretty 50-50 kind of mix of white and black? Was it principally one or the other?
No, it's a diverse community. It's a very diverse community. But as far as geographics, where people live at, that's where the equation tends to differ. You had most of your white population in Easton lives by the water, by the Bay Area, waterfront property. Most of your African American community lived more inland, farm area.
So do you see that? I'm going to assume that starts a divergence of experiences, even in a micro community such as Easton, with a black experience and a white experience. I mean, was that a noticeable thing as you grew up?
So my grandparents actually lived in a town that's called Hurlock, and in that little town is another little town called Williamsburg. In that town, we were the only black family. And we've always been the only black family in that town. And there's an interesting story behind that. I'm not sure if you want me to go into that or not, but that's how I grew up. We were the only black family there. When I got off the bus, if my grandparents wasn't home, I was allowed to go to the neighbor's house, and she watched me until my grandparents got home. But one thing I remember about that time was I was only allowed to stay in the living room. If I went to other areas in the house, she escorted me. So the living room was the only area that I could go into. And I do remember that.
Was there an area that you were thinking about going to that you wanted to save? Because I say let's go to it. Because what I want to do, I want to double back to this early experience and then compare it with the Air Force.
Sure. So being that we were the only African American family in that town, later I found out through conversation with my family, when my grandparents went to purchase the property and purchase the house, there was talk as to whether or not we could buy it. And there was two families within the neighborhood fighting over the land and the property. And out of spite, one of the families sold it to my grandparents. But we were the only family allowed to live in that area.
Interesting. I think we'll kind of develop that when we get into the Air Force side. Sure, if I can, kind of the same question.
Sure,
you grew up in Portland, right?
So I am from Portland, Oregon. I grew up in a military family as well. So my mother, she got out when she had me. My father stayed in. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. I got consistency growing up and really getting a lot of my experiences in Portland, Oregon. But I also got to travel a lot. So I got to go visit my father, live in lots of different places. I think for me, I knew I wanted to come into the military after my 7th grade year, living at Lake and Heath with him, and just seeing that experience, meeting friends, traveling all over. So I knew the Air Force would always be the service that I would go into.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
And the demographics of Portland at that time frame?
Definitely not 50-50.
Yeah.
So Portland has a very small minority community. So I don't know the exact percentages, maybe 4 or 5%. But within that, I will definitely say the black community within Portland, it's almost like a community within itself. So you would have Portland, and then you had the black community. For it to be such a small black community within Portland, I went to a majority black high school.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Mm-hmm. So I think that early on, I learned how to maneuver. So kind of similar to you, for us, the neighborhood that we moved into when I was in high school was a majority white neighborhood. We couldn't find realtors to really find us houses in those type neighborhoods, so we kind of had to do our own thing to kind of try to figure out, well, where are some other homes available? So where I lived in high school, we were the only black family. But where I went to high school, there were very few white students or Hispanic students or Asian students. So I learned how to maneuver in different environments very early on.
Yeah, can we explore that a little bit,
Sure.
Learning to maneuver?
So I think that, a lot of times in the black community, it's a safe space. You don't have to always worry about, am I being too loud? Am I drawing attention to myself? Am I behaving? I grew up in a very strict family as well. Growing up in Portland, you know, you don't embarrass the family. You know, if you're going out in public, you know, you may see other kids acting up in stores. You won't act up in stores. You will not, you know, bring discredit up on the family. We don't want anyone to, you know, look at us as if we're unruly. And I think that's probably pretty common in a lot of Black families. What may just be seen with other children as, oh, they're just being children. With Black children, we're a lot more aware of, I don't want my child to be seen as unruly, or that, you know, we are not good parents, or that they don't have a good upbringing. So there's that extra step to make sure that you are behaving, especially in public and especially when you're around other races. Absolutely.
Yeah, so as we kind of, I'm assuming that that kind of carries over into the Air Force.
Yes, sir.
So can you share with me some of the, maybe your first experiences, whether they were the same as what you're kind of articulating you're growing up, or if they differ, and how that differed?
Sure, I think that definitely I had a very early experience with that. So I learned early on, even from just watching. You come into the military, you see how people interact with different types of people. Something I noticed very early on is people can be very intimidated by Black people. I remember my very first assignment. I worked with an airman. He was a little bit older. Me and him both came in a little bit later. Very, very tall. I don't remember how tall he was, maybe 6'3", 6'4". I mean, he looked like he could have been a football player. And he was Black. And not only was he Black, but he had dark skin. And you can tell the difference, how people were immediately intimidated, and the way that they responded to him was different than how they responded to other people. And so I'm an observer. When I first get somewhere, I like to observe, kind of learn the ropes, learn people, watch people. And so I think I learned early on, you have to disarm people. You know, when I go into a conversation, I want to make sure that, you know, I don't have an attitude, I'm not super loud, I don't want to intimidate you, I'm here to help. So I think that I learned very early on that that's how you interact, that's what's going to help you be successful.
Yeah, Chief.
So I think for me, because my grandparents was very strict, yes sir, no nonsense. If you disrespected them, you know, they would put you in your place and put you in your place quickly. So when I came in the military, I was serious. I was no nonsense. I didn't tolerate sarcasm. I didn't tolerate the jokes. So I developed a behavior pattern that was aggressive and very direct. And with that, I was perceived as being unapproachable, not easy to talk to.
In the civilian world?
In the Air Force.
In the Air Force?
Yes, sir.
So when was that first made, were you first made aware of that? Or did somebody, you know, counsel you on it or something?
When I was an NCO, I had a superior officer tell me, you just come across as argumentative. And so I went back and I had to reflect on that, and I asked myself, what does that mean? Why am I argumentative? I know the AFIs, I know my job, I'm confident in what I'm doing. All I'm doing is stating the facts. If it's black and white, I was able to regurgitate what the AFI stated. So being told, you're very argumentative, you know, it took me back. I had to really go back and figure out, why am I being perceived this way? And it stuck with me for a very long time.
Is it?
I don't know that I have, but I have a very different personality as well. So, but I've seen that. I've seen people interact with other people that way. So I think that that goes back to the disarming people, especially, you know, as a first sergeant coming into a new squadron. It's, I want you to know when you see me, I'm not what you may stereotype a black woman coming into the office as. And I think a lot of black women face that as well, is I don't want you to see me and before you speak to me think that this is how I will be. And so I think that coming in the door, I feel like I'm already trying to break down barriers that may or may not be there. They're not always there, but you never know who you're dealing with. And I think that because I've seen it, I remember an example being at my last base, and we had an amazing senior NCO, and she was the president of the top 3. And I remember how the group, all the top 3 members, interacted with a lot of other, both males, white males, and just other people who had been the president. And they were very professional as well. They were very, you know, making sure things are on time, making sure that, you know, you're if you're going to speak, that we're doing it in a good manner, that we're not being disruptive. But when she did it, I would hear all the side conversations. I would hear the names that they would call her. I would hear like, why does she act like that? Or she's this, or she's that. And I couldn't understand it. She had been a PME instructor. She was extremely professional.
She's African American?
She's African American.
Okay.
And a lot of times, you know, I'm not quick to throw out the racist word. I'm not quick to throw that out because you never know why people are responding the way they are. Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of times there's a distinct difference in the words that we use for certain people, the bossy or, you know, the B word or different things where maybe a white person, whether a white female or a white male, can do those same things and they're not necessarily seen that way. I've seen white females who are seen as, well, they're very passionate. And a black female could do the same thing and she's a B. And it's like, well, why? What's the difference? Or I think even women in general a lot of times can be seen as emotional or bossy. And it's, well, why? They're passionate about what they're doing. They want to make sure that it's done right. So.
Now, as it translates into the Air Force, we were talking about your experiences and how, you know, really what I've learned over the course of time and having these conversations is that African Americans that are in the Air Force will have a offline conversation, again, my words, about behavior that will potentially, I guess with the goal of being able to have a journey that's a little smoother and the necessity for that because of perceptions. You were talking about one of your compatriots, I think, that was a you know, football player sized and skin tone was darker than I guess the average. I don't know,
Yes,
and that he's going to be viewed as intimidating and that kind of thing. Maybe can we rehash that a little bit, and then what I'll do is I'll take us back to the conversation that I want to get to eventually, which is the female experience, and then the African American experience, and then the female African American experience.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So going back to that airman, we both came in a little later. We were a little bit older than everyone else, but he was very tall, very big stature. But you could tell immediately when he walked in a room. People would become intimidated in the way that they treated him. He was that type airman, kind of like how Chief Hollins said, people wouldn't be quick to correct, they'd be quicker to just write the paperwork, because then you don't have to necessarily have that conversation and get to know him, get to understand the why behind some of the things he was doing. And he felt it. He would talk to us about it all the time. I don't know that he felt comfortable talking to other people that didn't look like him, who may not understand where he was coming from. But that was hard on him because he felt like everything was stacked against him just because of how he looks. And so I think that I've noticed that too, as far as coming in, wanting to make sure that I'm able to break down any barriers that may already be there just by how I look. Wanting people to know I don't want to intimidate you. I'm not going to be talking crazy. I'm not loud. We talked about the angry black woman, that I'm not that person. So I feel like sometimes coming into a new squadron, coming into a new group of people, I want to start breaking down barriers with my first hello and how I say it, my mannerisms, how am I standing, which is unfortunate. You don't want to come into a room. And of course, everyone doesn't have that viewpoint, but the truth is there are people who do.
Mm-hmm. Chief, you know, we're talking about this male airman that was perceived a certain way. I'd like you to comment on that, but then we're going to go to right where the shirt just went, which was the angry black woman. But can you comment on that first, and we'll kind of, because you were before the connection was lost, talking about how you personally are perceived because you're serious and that kind of thing.
And I felt that early on when I was a junior NCO. I was perceived as unapproachable. I didn't smile a lot because I'm an introvert. I wasn't a social person, so that was already a stereotype for me. I came across as unapproachable, but like Senior Morgan was talking about, that perception, because of his stature and the color of his skin, people kind of judged him and stereotyped him and was quick to give him paperwork versus having that conversation. That happens quite often, and it's unfortunate, and we do have to break down those barriers. And I've had subordinates or even coworkers come and talk to me about that, you know, and there's been...
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Sorry. There's been times where I've had to go talk to coworkers and say, listen, you know, this is the perception that you're giving off. You need to have the conversation.
See, this, let me just hit this real quick because I know we're going to shift gears, but if this is a conversation that happens in the African American community in the Air Force, isn't it a natural progression of thought that we have to pull this into all of the Air Force? Because if there's a perception that you are, and it's not just you that are articulating it, it's every conversation that I've had, that there's a misjudgment, I guess, on the countenance on someone's face, and you're reading it wrong. That seems a really fruitful area that we ought to get out on the table. If we're going to have tough conversations, let's talk about this. Hey, just because I'm an introvert and I have this face doesn't mean I'm not approachable, doesn't mean I'm angry.
Absolutely.
Would you say?
Absolutely. And that ties into how we're perceived as females in the Air Force. I'm short in stature. You know, I only talk when I'm asked to talk or if I have something to say. I'm not very social, so I just don't talk to be talking. But in that situation, I've found myself, if I don't speak up, I'm talked over in conversations, or I leave a meeting or a situation feeling like I'm not value added. I didn't bring anything to the table, so it's caused me to develop a behavior that appears to others as being aggressive or too direct. And so now I'm stereotyped.
Are you describing a female experience?
Yes, sir, I am.
Or an African American female experience?
That could be both. That could be both.
I think both easily can bleed over because some things are just personality types that can be seen and stereotyped as angry black woman but that might just be her personality that lots of races have. You know, there's introverts, there's extroverts, there's the middle ground. But I think that when we're seeing those situations, us as leaders, and when I say leader, I mean at any rank. If you're a staff sergeant, you're a leader. If you're a senior airman, you're a leader. And when you're leading other people, I think it's on us to get to know them. I understand that's difficult working up, and if your leader is the one that's behaving that way or doing things that you think are a certain way, but I think it's on us to build relationships. I think the relationship is going to break down all the barriers and get to the heart of the issue, because then you get to know who the person is beyond what you thought they might have been before you even had an opportunity to talk to them.
That's correct.
Go ahead, Chief.
I agree with that, and that goes back to your coworker you were talking about. Something simple as a leader needing to correct a subordinate because their hair is out of regs, or just dress and appearance standards. And they don't have the moral courage to go and do that, but you're going to come to another leader that happens to look like that subordinate to say, can you go talk to this person about X, Y, and Z? No, you're the leader. You go talk to them.
Yeah.
That's your responsibility.
Absolutely. Let's just drill right into the angry black woman. Give us your definition or the stereotype that has been the challenge, because we've mentioned it here sometimes directly, but also obliquely as well. Sure.
I think, so I've heard the term, and I hate, it's one of those things that really bothers me when I hear people use that term. But I've heard it in the example of, hey, sure, you know, we had someone, you know, she's loud, she's just rude, she has an attitude, that's a big one, attitude, she's just an angry black woman. And it's like, well, let's peel back, let's go back to maybe she as an individual. That's not, I don't like the term as this cover umbrella. Black women are not angry, you know. I think that a lot of times, could it be that maybe they're learning to adapt to their situation? Could it be, like you said, they are trying to overcompensate for their introvert, you know, and they're just trying to make sure that they're being heard, or maybe they're frustrated, or maybe they're trying to make it clear that this is what the regulation says. They're not trying to be an angry black woman, and it's frustrating when you're trying to fight against a stereotype that shouldn't be in the first place. Everyone should stand on their own merit, you know.
Black women For me as a black woman, I'm not an angry black woman, but if I've gone through experiences that cause me to feel like my voice is not being heard, or when I walk in a room, you automatically discredit what I'm bringing to the table, then when I give you a response to something, it's gonna come off with aggression, because I need you to know, yes, I'm intelligent, yes, I deserve to be here, and yes, I have value added. I have something to bring to the table. And people may not be used to that. But that's me being me, because I need you to understand, yes, I deserve to be here. Yes, I do wear this rank. Yes, I do deserve to have this position. And, you know, I stay quiet, like I said, and I only speak when I need to be spoken to, but oftentimes when I have to speak, it's going to come out, and it may be direct, and some people may not be receptive to that, and I'm labeled the angry black woman.
Yeah, so if I'm listening to you all describe the experience, there is a disarming quotient that you apply to disarm that, and on yours, you're powering through.
I am.
Is what I hear you saying. Because I was going to ask you, do you try to defang that? Do you try? But I think I mean, obviously you're successful. You're Chief Master Sergeant, United States Air Force. But I think you're just moving the throttle up and saying, we're just going to power through this. If I'm going to be called an angry black woman, I'm going to be called an angry black woman. That
has happened, but that's come at a cost. There was a point in my career where, because I was still learning to adjust to the military, and there was a point I had to learn how to deal with people differently. You go through the stages of learning leadership styles and learning that you can't deal with everybody the same, because everybody has different personality types. So I was going through that time in my career, and I had a particular boss that she was not having it. She was not having it, and we went through a situation where it took all the motivation out of me.
She was not having what?
She just didn't like my personality.
And
I got the job done.
Is she white?
No, she's actually Asian.
Okay.
I was getting the job done. I was task oriented. You know, they could rely on me to do the mission, but my personality and her personality clashed. And so we went through a series of events, and I was left feeling like if I could get out of the military today, I would. And it scarred me. It really did. The blue that I have for the Air Force now was gone then. And it took a long period of time for me to build that back up. But even today, I'm careful. I'm careful in the decisions I make. I'm careful in the feedback that I give. I'm careful even when it comes to mentoring, because of that very situation that happened to me early on in my career.
Okay, so how do you address a mentoring situation because of that? What would your approach be that might not be your natural given default position?
I have to be honest, sir. In a mentorship situation, I probably never let a mentee see my true self. I'm very careful with the conversation that I have with them, because I don't want anything to come back to bite me. So I'm very careful with the conversations I have with people that I mentor.
Surely you, from a first sergeant perspective.
I'm very honest with people in mentorship. I love to reach out, especially our young black airmen, especially the males, just because from what I've seen, they're some of our most under-mentored airmen in the Air Force. They're overlooked constantly. I've seen individuals actively looking for someone to mentor, going down the alpha roster, and will skip over all the black males, and they're just out there trying to figure it out, you know. So I love to reach out and talk to them. I'm very candid with them, even coming down to the AFIs. I had a conversation recently with someone. This is what the AFI says. Yes, you can do this. If you do this with your hair, is it possible that people are going to look at you and stereotype you? It's very possible. We're going to have to pick our battles. Yeah. So you just have to decide. Yes, the AFI says you can do it. Yes, you're absolutely correct. You're correct. You can do it. But unfortunately, sometimes that's going to put you in a bubble. Sometimes people will say, oh, we don't want to give them the award. Maybe they shouldn't walk across the stage if they look like that. Just because, and to be honest with you, it's something I've struggled with. You know, when I take my pictures for my official picture, I usually straighten my hair for the picture. When I go into a new squadron as a first sergeant, I typically straighten my hair. And is it wrong? Is it right? I don't think it's either, but it's something that I've struggled with. I want to be seen as professional. You know, I don't want to be judged on my hair. I want them to see my personality first. I want them to see what I have to offer. I want them to see my leadership style first. And it shouldn't be a distraction, but honestly, it is, unfortunately, because this is what they see first. This is what they see first, you know. And so I use those as mentoring moments. Certainly when people come to me, I'll tell them my truth. I'll tell them how I see it, and then they have to make their own decisions. Some people, you know, can power through it. Some people, you have to find what works for you. You know, it's tough sometimes just trying to navigate.
So excuse me, Chief, I'll come back to you. I've said this several times that, you know, 36 years in the Air Force, this last few months, have opened my eyes to any number of things. And preparing to do this with you all, here's one. This that I've never heard of, or at least I haven't consciously, and that might be a key phrase here, acknowledged, is this concept of straightening hair to look more professional. And so if I have heard you all, I mean, this is a thing. I mean, it's not like this isn't a one-off example. This is one of those, I guess, offline conversations that, am I right?
Yes, sir.
So, Chief, you and I were talking about braids.
Yes.
Can you share that?
Yeah, so when we got the invitation to come meet you, there was some reservation in my mind, and the first thing that I thought was, should I go and meet the general with braids in my head? And the reason I had that thought was because, again, like you said, does it present a professional image? Now, that's my own internal thoughts, and that goes back to an experience that I had. I've spent some time in the PME world. I was a PME commandant, and prior to getting selected for the job, I wore my hair in a natural ponytail. It was a ponytail, you know, with a fro. And when I was told I got the job, I immediately pressed my hair and I cut my hair. I cut it real short. And I thought that would be more professional because I was going to be on the stage all the time. And for 6 or 7 years, I wore a short cut so that I could appear to be professional. This year will be the first time I wore braids since 2011.
I think that you have to look at when we came in, and I don't know what year you came in. I came in 2001. Braids were authorized, you know, at that time. But just because something is authorized doesn't mean that people's perceptions have changed. And so I don't think that we're fighting against the AFI.
Yeah.
I think we're fighting against the perception of what looks professional. Sometimes I cringe at that word because there is a standard of beauty in our country and in the Air Force, a standard of professionalism. And oftentimes, African Americans don't fit into that standard of what their hair naturally looks like. And it's tough, I'll tell you, when you go to squadrons and it's like, all right, we got PT, we're about to run, shower, and get back, and it's like, okay, if my hair's straight, okay, it's gonna sweat out. What is it gonna look like when I go to work? Because I still want it to look professional.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
What do you mean?
Sweat out. You lose the flattening
right.
aspect.
So when you could either flat iron it. Some people put chemicals in their hair to straighten it, and it's funny. So I'm going to tell you a quick story. Okay. So at my last base, we had an airman who started a fire in her dorm room, and when we got down to the cause of the fire was a pressing comb that caught on fire. And I had a conversation with the command chief, me and one of the other shirts. We were the only two black individuals at the table. And she said, what is a pressing comb? And I said, Chief, you don't know what a pressing comb is? So it's an iron comb. When I grew up, we put it on the stove. You put it on the eye of the stove to warm it up, get it really, really hot, put a little bit of oil on your hair, and use that comb to straighten your hair. Now you have them, I still have mine that you put on the stove, but there's a lot of people you have it, you can plug it in, and it can be an electric hot comb. And unfortunately, that airman had left it out, left it plugged in, and it started a fire. And we explained to her she was trying to straighten her hair, and she left it in. And she didn't understand that. But especially after PT, if your hair is straight, when you sweat, your hair is going to revert back to its natural state.
Gotcha.
So if your hair is naturally straight, that's so easy for you. You can get in the shower, you can, maybe throw a little gel in it to catch some of the hairs that stick up. But it's a lot more difficult sometimes for us. A lot of times maybe you'll see us, with our hair tied down, trying to make sure that it stays. But it's a lot more work to try to fit the mold of what we're told is professional. And then if you don't wear your hair straight, it could be in all these amazing natural styles that now we're able to do, but you're still fighting against the perception. It's so much healthier for our hair. I look at, some of our military Black females who have retired, and the things that they're going through, hair loss, alopecia, having to get hair implants because they've tried to put chemicals and they've stretched it and they're doing all these things that their hair is not meant to do.
Yeah.
But we're trying to fit the mold of being professional, and it takes a toll on our bodies. So I really appreciate the changes that we have, but I think that we still fight against the perception. And as the AFI changes, hopefully the times will change and the perceptions will change as that's normalized. Right. But certainly we were in, as the changes were coming on. So the perceptions, I think, are still there. So I think that's what we're fighting with.
And your hair shouldn't determine your leadership style. If I have braids, if I have dreadlocks, if I have a natural fro, that shouldn't allow you to determine who I am as a leader because of my hairstyle.
Yeah. And
oftentimes we're judged based on that.
Yeah, you and I were talking about this study that's undergoing right now, right? About, I think it's specifically about women's hairstyles. And you and I were both sharing that we're kind of old school from what's I don't know if you said the words professional, but what's kind of operational. Any thoughts along that lines that you want to share?
Those changes they're going to affect everybody. I know for me, I'm old school, so I'm a very standards person. I'm black and white. So if the standards come out and now I can wear a ponytail that hangs to the middle of my back, it's going to take some getting used to because it's not what I'm used to. I'm used to Air Force's image of what's professional.
Yeah. Dan?
Lots of great comments out there on social media. Ashley Montgomery says, love the transparency from Chief Williams, my former boss and my current first sergeant. Mary Polanco, I appreciate all this candor and honesty. Thanks for having this conversation. Crystal Perkins, I can relate on so many levels to this conversation. One question going back to the angry Black woman was, what advice would you have for a Black female airman who feels maybe they're perceived as such?
I would say talk to somebody. I think that sometimes if someone is saying something, there's always some truth that's in it, right? So does that mean that you're an angry Black woman? No. But what is the root of that? At the end of the day, we want to be professional. We want to be relational. That's what's going to make us successful in the Air Force. So I think that having someone who's going to be honest with you, if it's, hey, I'm an introvert, maybe that's why I'm not heard. What can I do to help pull me out of that? So something in a healthy way. But I think that having a buddy check, being honest with yourself, and not allowing the angry Black woman, the words that are being said to affect you, but at the heart, is there something that I can work on? And if there's not, if I'm doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing and it's their issue, then let it be their issue. But at the end of the day, I think that you always have to take a look at yourself to say, is there something I can improve on? The answer might be yes, and the answer might be no.
I think Senior Morgan hit spot on, and this goes back to my response to mentorship when I said I'm very careful. So what I meant by that is I wait for the window of opportunity. So if it's a subordinate and she's being told she's an angry Black woman, she comes to me for advice or mentorship, now that window of opportunity is there. And I can have the conversation with her, and I'm very honest with her, and I let her know, just like you said, you need to self-reflect because there's something in that you can learn from. but these are the things you need to do moving forward.
Yeah, at the root of all of this, these various flavors of conversations is the same thing, though, and it's communication. Your answer was, seek somebody out and talk to them. And that's why I say in the beginning, this is commander's business. This is chief's business. This is first sergeant business. Because when you shine light on these situations, it de-arms it to a large degree. And it's what we haven't done in the Air Force, at least effectively, my opinion, over the course of my career, which is 3.5 decades now. And what is coming out in droves, and just in the last 3 or 4 months. I've told you the number of things that I'm like, I never knew that. Why? Because we don't talk about it. And some of these things, I think, if it is routine and it's happening, not just at the MAJCOM level, not just at the center level, but at the squadron level, at the flight level, at the whatever, the element level, there's a lot of goodness to come from shining sunlight on that and talking about it.
There's a question actually from a spouse. Jennifer Blazer asks, what can spouses do to help with the race issue and some of these perceptions? Is there something that spouses can do? We always talk about the family as being part of that holistic Air Force family.
I would have to say just be that sounding board for your military spouse that's in. A lot of times we go through things at work, and sometimes we don't take work home with us, so we don't share those conversations with our spouse about what we went through the course of the day. But that's not healthy. You need to take the time to have those conversations to get it out. And I would say just be a sounding voice for your spouse. When it comes to race, when it comes to issues of diversity and discrimination, whatever the case may be. And sometimes all we need to do, we just want to vent. We just want to be heard. We just need to have a conversation. We don't necessarily need a response, but just to listen. So if our spouses could just, take the time, just let us vent. Just let us vent. I think that's a healthy approach.
And this is for Sergeant Morgan to start. Do you feel like we're at a point where airmen of all ranks feel they are in a safe space to have these difficult conversations, maybe with their peers and even upwards looking up at the chain of command?
I don't think for everyone, no. So I don't think that I could give a blanket answer to that. Definitely from the conversations that I've seen happening, I think that we're starting to get there. And that's all it takes, right, is to get that ball rolling. And then once you start to create an environment, and that's going to be incumbent on us as leaders, as peers, as coworkers, because how we respond to this is what's going to determine the outcome if it continues. There's a lot of individuals right now who don't want to be called out. There's a lot of individuals who are the only Black person in their squadron. And when we have these conversations, leaders are wanting to do the right thing, but they're highlighting those individuals, and they don't want to be highlighted. Everyone doesn't feel comfortable telling their story. Everyone doesn't have a story to tell. Everyone's situation and experience is different. So I would say, I think it's a safe place for some people. I think the more important question is, are we creating a safe space for people? I think that's something that everyone in the Air Force can look around them at their sphere of influence and say, am I creating a safe space for the people who work in my cubicle, who work next to me, who are within my section, my flight, my squadron? And that's how we'll get there.
Yeah, and I echo what Senior Morgan says, because I think it's important to continue to have open dialogue about this particular situation. It needs to be a climate where they feel comfortable, a safe climate, having those conversations. Hey, I'm feeling like this today, or I don't like what you said and you offended me. The conversations need to continue.
Right, and that's exactly the point, and it needs to be sustained. General Goldfein challenged us as leaders after the Protect Our Defenders report came out, and it said, hey, we're going to own this. We're not going to make excuses for it. This is a problem. We need to address it. But the challenge isn't going to be in the month of June when we really were addressing it, or even in July. It's going to be in the months ahead when COVID challenges or the flu season or the hurricane season or the fires, and when everything else starts to get in its way, was that the crisis of the month and we need to move on? The answer can't be yes. The answer has to be no, it's not. This has to be sustained. And so really, my message back is these conversations, while it helps on social media, it isn't safe space, it can be close, but my hope is that it serves as an example, and an example that we need to continue and that we sustain. It just becomes routine part of doing business.
Chief, this question really is for you to start, because you kind of talked to this about your own personal experience. But the question is how do you build that Air Force Blue back up when you feel like you have been treated differently because you are a woman, let alone a black woman?
Yeah, that's tough. It took years for me. It wasn't something that happened overnight, and I had strong leaders that pulled on me. And I think as leaders, we have to recognize individuals that are struggling in their Air Force career, and we have to reach out to them and pull on them. And that's what I experienced after that situation happened. I had leaders that just reached out to me, and they encouraged me, they talked to me, they told me, hey, this is what you need to do. So they helped me get to where I'm at today. And I always say, as a chief, you haven't arrived. When you get that stripe, now it's time for you to pay it forward. And that's what I'm doing, because I didn't get here by myself. There was a lot of leaders that helped me along the way that saw I was struggling and I was at my breaking point. Not mentally, but just career choices. I had to determine whether or not I wanted to stay in or get out. And I remember asking my husband when I went through this particular situation, can I get out? And at the time, it was the birth of my daughter, and she was born with a birth injury. So, I have career, I feel like it's going down the toilet, and then I have my first child that was injured. So it was a traumatic time for me, and I was really on the point of just throwing in a towel and saying, look, I don't want this. I can go back home to Maryland and start all over. And I had leaders that just looked out for me. They were resilient leaders, and they helped me get to that point where I decided, okay, one day at a time, step by step. And that would be my advice to those out there that may have experienced a similar situation. Stay encouraged. There's leaders out there that will reach out to you. And I would say this, find a leader that you admire, that you want to pattern yourself after. Go have the conversation. I did that many times in my career. I would go to people and say, look, I don't know you, you don't know me, but you're where I want to be. Can you mentor me? And we just have to do it as leaders.
I can tell you what probably if I had to point to one thing, not that there is only one, but that has energized me on this journey, it's comments that very close to what you just said about I lost the blue, or I forgot how you phrased it.
Right. Blueness.
Yeah, the blueness going away. I've heard it described by others as I'm struggling to put on the cloth of our nation, or does the Constitution apply to me? That hits me in the core. Where I'm a senior leader in the United States Air Force. There's no denying that, and I can't abide that. Hey, we may have some differences. You may have a personal problem with one of your coworkers, but when I hear that, I'm like, I simply will not abide that in my Air Force. It just hits me at my core if I hear a statement that I'm not sure that I'm in your same Air Force you're in. It just made me very determined. That's one of the things that's going to sustain me on doing this. Is like, this can't be the way it is.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, sir. I do.
Thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate you hanging with our technical difficulties. Chief, First Sergeant, thanks very much. Your experience is an important one for us. At the end of the day, I say, I've said this several times and I believe it, we're in a moment in our Air Force, and we're going to be judged. We're going to be judged as leaders on this, and if we acknowledge that, then why not make the decision to make good history? So let's make good history. Folks, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Look to see you for the next time on Real Talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you.